Welcome everyone. It's 1 o'clock and we've got plenty to go through today, so I will go quickly. Welcome to this Mind Out webinar on You Can't Deny It, Gender Euphoria Save Lives, and happy Trans Day of Visibility for yesterday. My name is Liz Wilkinson, and before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're all joining from unceded lands across Australia. I'd like to pay our collective respects to the traditional custodians of those lands and acknowledging the continuing connection to land, water and culture that First Nations people have. I'm joining from the lands of the Gadigal people, so I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I'd welcome you all to share in the chat where you're joining from today. At this point, I'd also like to acknowledge people with lived experience of mental health and suicidal distress, in particular LGBTIQ+ communities, and acknowledge our chosen families and supports, and acknowledge the continuing role that we play in the reform of mental health systems. So, as I was saying, I'm Liz Wilkinson and my pronouns are she and they, and I'm the Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Manager at LGBTIQ+ Health Australia. And I'm currently working on the Find Out program, our mental health suicide program. And next I have an invitation for all of you from our panelist, Neko, which is to share why you use your pronouns. So for myself, I use they because I guess I don't really feel I fit into a binary the way that other people in society seem to. And I use she because I would hate for some kind of internalized misogyny to be pushing me away from that. So that's for me, and we welcome you to share in the chat function down below where you're joining from. Yes, I already asked you to do that, but also why you use the pronouns that you use. And so while you're doing that, I'll go through a bit of housekeeping. If you found the chat function, then right by it, you'll find also should be a Q&A function. So we welcome you to add any questions in the chat there, or in the Q&A function there. We are recording this session, so it will be available to registrants afterwards. And finally, we are going to be sitting with some heavy content today. So we welcome you to reach out to services like QLife, go to their website and they have a telephone and an online chat that you can access most evenings, and there's a bunch of other free helplines available. So next, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to do a bit of an introduction of themselves. And I'm going to ask each of them to please share about their pronouns and also what gender euphoria means to them. And first, I would like to welcome Dr. Vic Fraser, they, she, who's the Executive Director at Agenda in the ACT. And I'd highlight that Vic is passionate about the rights of LGBTIQA+ people to access safe, respectful, visible agency, support and celebration. Welcome, Vic. Thank you.
Thank you. So yes, I'd like to, before I kick in with a bit of an intro to Agenda, just echo that acknowledgement and acknowledge that I'm joining from Ngunnawal country here in the ACT, and that we're really fortunate to have an amazing, supportive First Nations community here as well, that we're proud to work with when we can. So Agenda has operated in the ACT for around 20 years, providing support to transgender, diverse and intersex people in the region. And we're one of the few organisations that actually works with, both transgender, diverse communities and people with innate variations of sex characteristics as well, acknowledging that there are similarities in some of the stigmas and isolation and negativity that are experienced by both of those groups, but also profound differences in those communities as well. We're a community-led organisation. We were started 20 years ago, so this is our birthday year. and we're very excited to be celebrating such a huge milestone. We were started by a group of passionate transgender, diverse, and intersex people who realised that there was a lack of support, community support, and services for our communities back in 2005. Since then, we've grown phenomenally, and we now have a staff. We started with a purely volunteer community-led organisation. We now have a staff of over 16 people, and we operate across 4 different kind of domains, I guess. One is peer navigation and service navigation, peer support, advocacy, and we do systemic and individual advocacy. And we also do training, policy development, policy review, and professional development activities. When we do our work, we talk about supporting our community. And one of the things that I really love about this organisation is that we define community very broadly. So when we're talking about community, we're talking about people with a lived experience of being transgender, diverse, or having an innate variation of sex characteristics. But we're also talking about their families. We're talking about their partners, their lovers, their friends, people in their lives that support them, including people that they might work with. This is all our community, and we need every single person within that community to be with us on our journeys so that we can thrive and succeed. And so as an organisation, we position ourselves to be there to support each and every person that is in the lives of a transgender, diverse, or intersex person. And we provide those services for them. I'm just looking at my cheat sheet, I'm sorry. So the other thing that we do that I think is quite wonderful and quite unique is that we support people across their entire age range. So we have one of the youngest people that uses our services is around 3 years old. And we have people, well into their 70s who are engaged with us. We meet people where they're at, whatever stage in their journey they're at, we meet them there, and we go with them as far as they want us to, in whatever direction they want to go. So it really is a person-centered, agency affirming approach that we take here, no matter what the life stage is. And we're really, really passionate this year about intergenerational connections as well, and making sure that our services offer that opportunity for that 3-year-old to sit with that, 73-year-old and have those conversations and build that support. So that's a bit of an overview of us. I'll answer your other question now about my pronouns and why I use them, and what gender euphoria means to me really quickly. So I'm a proud trans masculine butch, and so I use they them pronouns predominantly. I choose them because I'm not exclusively male. I'm not a man. I'm also not a woman. But that becomes tricky for me too, because I also don't see myself as non-binary. I see myself as a fairly binary representation of masculinity. So it's an odd one for me, but they them seems to work. The she is there as a little bit of a acknowledgement of my butch elders. So I was very fortunate when I was a young person to have some really strong, proud butch women who took me under their wing and nurtured me in a way that was actually quite life-saving. And so as an acknowledgement of them and an acknowledgement of my roots as an individual in that community, I keep the she there as well. So in terms of gender euphoria, what did I write? I wrote a few dot points here. Pride, joy, and comfort. Feeling confident in my skin. A slick haircut. And I'll never forget the first time I got my hair cut at the barber's and I walked out going, oh, this is amazing. A good pair of shoes. It's funny how many times I hear people talk about the first time they wear shoes that look right and fit right, and how that just sort of centers everything. And I certainly can, I get a smile every time I think about the smile on my face the first time I had that with a pair of shoes. And strength and joy in what my body can and does do, not what it can't do. And that's what gender euphoria means to me.
Thank you so much, Vic. I think next up was Stacey May, Lakoe Duffield, she, her, and who is the founder and director at Queer and Diverse Pathway over in WA. Thanks, Stacey May.
Thanks, Liz. So, hello, folks. My name's Stacey May. Pronouns are she, her. I'm on the Wajak Noongar Budja here in Perth, so Borlu. This land is really important to me. I did a great exercise with the Aboriginal community as part of my work at the Commission previously, and really got to learn about country and culture. So that has a huge part of my social and emotional well-being journey, is being connected to land and my emotional self. So always encourage you to get in touch with local elders and do that connection for yourself. Because I now know that water heals me. So yeah, really. So I'm the CEO of CEO now of Queer and Diverse Pathways. I'm also a board member of Sexual Health Quarters, and I do volunteering with Roses in the Ocean as a peer care companion, and also part of the Mind Out team here, LGBTIQA plus Health Australia. So I'm a mother and a woman, a basketball player, a big fan of the Spectres, and obviously they were founded in '82, and I was born in '82, so I find like it's a match made in heaven, literally. So, but also apparently I'm a trans woman. And so just to take you through a bit of my journey, that trans woman word for me anyway, and part of why my pronouns are she, her, was always a word given to me. Right? I just saw myself as a woman from 11 years old, and I suffered some family violence. I still have images of that with my father, looking back at him from the floor and him trying to make me angry and tell me I had to grow up, I had to be a man, and all these things that I hold. So for me, transitioning was very much going from one extreme to another, and I've kind of held on to the she, her. There was a point, probably a couple of years into my journey, where I found Stacey May, and I much prefer people to refer to me as Stacey May, but I keep my pronouns as she, her, because it reflects the struggle that I had to go from A to B, and I'm a mother hen. I love to support people my whole life, and they all have really important respect for that, like the elders of me, which are my grandma, and I didn't have a hero, a trans hero, so I had Poison Ivy as a kid to be my hero. So it's really important for me to kind of hold the she, her, but I do much prefer being called Stacey May, and I like the whole word. So Stacey is Greek for rebirth, and her is the Mandarin for beautiful. So it's to be reborn beautiful. So I really hold them to me. One of the things for me is statistically, I shouldn't be sat here today. The Private Lives 3 report, I think it was last year, said that nearly 1 in 2 trans women had a fatal or near fatal, non-fatal experience last year in the last 12 months. And that includes me. All right, so if I didn't have the support structure that I have around me now, with having programs and agencies, they wouldn't have that support, and I wouldn't still be here. And if I hadn't been able to continue the journey, I would not be here. And I'm here for 3 things now, and that's to be authentically me and live my journey. For my son, I've an 8-year-old boy who's hugely important to my journey, and that is my anchor to live, because I don't want to pass on that baton of pain to him to carry for the rest of his life. So I see my journey as breaking the circle. And what I try and do is if I'm going to stay, I'm going to stay with purpose. So my 3rd kind of pillar has been no young person lives my journey. It's not just about the trans experience, it's all people. So that is part of me building Queer and Diverse Pathways. So when I first sort of transitioned, I moved into mental health. I worked at youth mental health at North Metro in Perth, and then I moved to the Mental Health Commission of WA to do the lived experience leadership there as a senior project manager, and just found systemic advocacy really hard. It's a long game. When we're coming up with plans, we're talking about 10 years time. In 10 years, we want to be somewhere. And I really got left with this frustrating feeling of, what about today? Like when I do my on-the-ground peer support, so I was doing homelessness on a Tuesday night, and I'm doing my peer support with Roses, and in my own sort of grassroots peer support. And I just went, who's helping today? And that was a really big gap. So I resigned in August last year, and it took me a couple of months to work out how I was going to do it. And we started the journey in November of building Queer and Diverse Pathways. So last month we achieved our NDIS registration, which is amazing. So now we can support our queer NDIS participants as a registered provider, and also bringing other providers to come and support us in that journey. And that's really what Queer and Diverse Pathways is all about. So it's a peer-led organisation dedicated to really providing that inclusive and affirming services to all queer folk, trans especially, neurodivergent as well. For me, as an autistic ADHD person, when I go into a service, I'm overwhelmed with all these forms and processes. I just kind of go, ah, you know what I mean? It's just get overwhelmed, and I just walk away, right? Because I can't. And Rose in the Ocean was one of the first organisations that kind of put, and I think it came from Health Australia's data saying 70% of my community, the trans community, don't access crisis support before they have a non-fatal or fatal suicide. And you just go, that's scary. It's the first time, like through Mind Out and through Rose in the Ocean, that I found organisations that understood that concept of we've got to build safety first. And that's what Queer and Diverse Pathways is. People that benefit, we do three main areas. So we sort of do peer mentoring and peer support. So, you know, when you go to an appointment, you spend 50 minutes in an appointment, right? What happens for the rest of that time? Who holds your hand through the really dark times? Who's going to help you with the hard things to make them a bit easier for you and explain things? We also then do like social participation and community stuff and a lot of stuff around the NDIS and helping people navigate their plans and services. But we also do personal growth and we do business development. So all the employees that work for me, I've got 11 now. If they don't own their business already, they're on a pathway to own their own business because it's about thriving. I'm really, I'll say fed up, to have a better way of describing it this morning, but I get really frustrated when I see the deficit models in all of our proposals and our policies and procedures and stuff we're building. Like, I don't want to be more resilient to a system that's killing me, right? I want to know what my strengths are and get the support behind me to work on those strengths, you know, fill the gaps in what I don't have. So it's not having that deficit model. So, and again, like say person-centered, it's that identity first, because we're different in every room. I'm great one-on-one, but put me in a room of crowded people, I'll stand in the corner shivering like a wreck because I can't handle that emotion and that energy. And that's really what Queer and Diverse Pathways is about. It's an all of journey support, not just the instantaneous one you have to do at a specific time slot. And that's kind of me, really. I hope that from today, you'll also have that belief in yourself that we want a world where no young person lives that journey, right? So we can just roll our sleeves up, get our hands dirty, get in contact with us, happy to partner, and really make a better world for our community, especially right now.
Thank you so much, Stacey May, for sharing and for the work that you're doing. And you're making me think about why did I get this group of people together for everybody? Big, obviously, agenda. One of our big members is, you know, got a lot of wisdom to share in this space. And I was really hoping to kind of share some exciting news about what's happening out there to kind of bolster people's joy, I guess, and hope. And I think that what you're doing with Queer and Diverse Pathways and what I've learned from you over the time that you've been involved in the Mind Out program, the champions, it's been much appreciated and really excited about what you're doing over there. So thank you. Thanks for sharing. And Neko as well. Neko was pointed towards by a contact up at Two Spirits with the very exciting work that Neko's been doing with the Femme Society. So Neko Brocky, welcome. She, her is the service delivery coordinator at Open Doors Youth Service in Queensland and running the state's first dedicated program to support trans feminine youth, which is called the Femme Society. It's very exciting work as well. So welcome, Neko.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm Nico. I use she, her pronouns because I'm a very proud trans woman and really first understood gender and identity through strong trans women around me. So feel very honored and privileged to use those pronouns. I am a settler here on Yagara and Turrbal country in Mugginjin or Mianjin, Brisbane. I'm the service delivery coordinator of Open Doors, the only dedicated queer and trans youth service. So we were started 25 years ago by a community, by a strong lesbian social worker and counsellor. And then 25 years later, it's a little bit shocking to say that we're the only dedicated queer and trans youth service in this state still. So we really look to why we exist, and that's because we know that queer and trans young people are 15 times more likely to suicide than their cisgender counterparts. And I think no matter who we are, our identity, our sexuality, what so-called state we live in, that's a statistic we all want to be part of changing. And I think that 25 years ago, I'm sure that's why we started. And today, that's definitely why we work and why we continue to do this work at Open Doors, is because we know that 80% of our community have self-harmed. We know that 73% of, trans youth have experienced high or very high levels of psychological distress. So I think that really indicates that we've got so much work to do for the next generation. One of the first days here at Open Doors, this amazing young trans woman, 15 years old, came into the service and said, I didn't know that my support worker was going to be a trans woman because I thought that all trans women took their own lives or got murdered. And I think if you're 15 and you're trans in this continent now known as Australia, and that's your future, that's something that we all want to be part of changing. That's really why Open Doors is doing this hard work and why we're so proud to walk alongside our community, because we know that across the youth population, 85% of young people who have a negative first experience at a health provider never go back. What's that statistic like for queer and trans people who are dead named, who are discriminated against because of their race, their culture, their identity? If they use the wrong pronouns, the wrong name repeatedly, what are the chances of our community going back to these mainstream health providers? And I think this really feeds into our mission and our vision here at Open Doors, which is we want to create a future where all young people, are valued, are authentic, experience joy and resilience and love and community. These are things that all young people deserve. And I think that we've been in a real period of growth recently that I'm so proud to be a part of, because we know we need to show up as hard as we can for our community, especially in this hard time where the Queensland government has put a pause on gender affirming healthcare for all people under 18. We have seen a 78% increase in referrals since this. We know that our community are really calling out for support at the moment. We know that they're isolated. We know that there's severe mental health impacts because of this. We're a very small and mighty team. We're already supporting over 600 people. We provide support to over 3,500 occasions of service each year. So we're small, but we're really doing as much as we can. And we're so proud to have grown the team from 6 staff to nearly 20. And by the end of the week, we're a team of 20 here at Open Doors, and we've just opened our second location. So we're based sort of more in Mugginjin CBD, but now we have a second hub out in Logan, which we're so proud of. We've started offering a First Nations support group. We offer a drop-in service now, an online group statewide, and we really, we know that we have to be more tailored always to the young people. So we've stopped being so siloed into buckets and saying, like, on a Monday you've got an AOD issue, or on Tuesday, you want to talk about your gender, and on Wednesday you want to talk about housing. That's not how our lives work, and that's not how our services should work. So now we have lived experience professional youth advocates, and we have counsellors, and we have an amazing domestic and family violence worker, the first ever domestic and family queer frontline worker in this state. So we're so proud to offer that support to our community. And we're really, trying to show up for young people and meet them where they are and how they deserve to be supported and walked alongside. So I hope that gives a little bit of a snapshot of the support that we're providing and why we exist at Open Doors, and why we see it as a privilege and an honor to do this hard work. For me, gender euphoria means that it's community, it's showing up for each other when times are good, and it's especially showing up for each other when times are hard. It's, the cups of tea after a long day. It's, telling each other that you're more than valid, beautiful, and worthy. And it's really, working together to reach our justice, our joy, our liberation, and our freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Nico. I think this is the question that's covered a lot elsewhere, and we don't necessarily have to spend a lot of time on it, but just to continue with the big questions. I was hoping you could all share your thoughts on why gender affirming care is life-saving care. Vic?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick that one off. I think for me, it breaks down into a few different areas, and I'm going to show my age here, but I remember being about 16 or so when the movie Patch Adams came out. I don't know if anyone remembers Patch Adams, but there's a really powerful scene in Patch Adams where he's doing his internship, and they're talking about this person who's lying in a hospital bed, and just talking about, you know, the condition that this person has, and Patch puts his hand up and says, "What's her name? What's the patient's name?" And everyone's gobsmacked. And I think about that. That was the norm back then, that people would go into the health system and be invisible. They were just a list of conditions and whatnot. And we can look at that and say, that's appalling. Can you imagine going into a doctor's surgery or a hospital and no one ever using your name? And yet, when it comes to our trans and gender diverse communities, we fully expect that not just in hospital, not just in healthcare, but everywhere in life, it would be absolutely okay to never see that individual. And then I think about what the flow-on effect of that is. To say, okay, to this person all the time, you are not visible, you are not able to be seen, you are not able to live as yourself. Where does that go? Where does that go for an individual if that's their everyday experience? So let's flip it and say, okay, in the same way that everyone can expect to go into any environment and be called by their name, well, now we have a trans or gender diverse person who goes into an environment and is called by their name, and is not only said, you know, I see you and I'm going to use your name. We say, what do you need to live fully and participate fully in every aspect of the world around you? In the same way we do that for any other individual. You know, what do you need from your medical care, from your social care, from your legal recognition? And I'm going to help you achieve that. And that's what gender affirming care is. Gender affirming care is helping a person to be visible in this world. And that's why it saves lives, because visibility is how we thrive. Invisibility kills. And so let's focus on that visibility and how we can achieve that for people. And I think if we think about that in the context of, well, for any matter that I'm approaching a health professional for, I would expect that care is going to focus on my strengths, not my deficits. I'm going to expect that is future focused, not past focused. I'm going to expect that that's going to center my agency and my decision-making capability. Then I know that healthcare is protected. That's the healthcare standards. Yeah. And so we need to apply that same lens to the healthcare we provide to trans and gender diverse people, and we end up with life-saving affirming care.
Thanks, Vic. Oh, yeah, and to jump onto that, I think it's Audre Lorde who says, my silence didn't save you then, it won't save you now. So it's very much about being out there and proud. So I really echo, like reflecting on my first Pride event. Right? So 3 years ago, one of my first trans woman I ever met invited me to Pride, and I was still wearing my wig, in a pin dress, kind of lipstick I didn't really know how to apply. You know, I think I had the orange face syndrome without mentioning a name. But you just sort of go, like, I was so scared and so frightened. And then as we turned into Gloucester Park, because they closed this march from the city and put us into Gloucester Park, you know, and there's a lot of rage about being put in a corner and all that stuff. But when I walked through that gate and saw, must have been 20,000 plus people standing there, waving flags, cheering, clapping, you know, and I just suddenly had this, I'm tearing up just thinking about it still. Like, it's the first moment in my life where I was like, I'm not alone. You know, it's like, wow, there's a community, there's other people, and they were all different. presenting different ways, from drag queens to goth folk and punk and rainbows, people in butterfly outfits, and just it's just a beautiful. And I was like, I've never seen somewhere full of so much self-expression, because I've lived a lifetime. I've never been able to self-express, and I can't talk about, and I can't put the words for what that does internally. Right? It's literally like a wall coming down, like we're ripping down the Berlin Wall again. You know, it's that kind of like, wow, I can be me, I can be authentic, I can do the things that I've always dreamed about. Like I talk to a lot of people about my journey, and I said I pinch myself, right? Because I'm already living my dream. When I was a young trans person, not that I knew what that was then, I was like, I want to be like that, like this beautiful woman I see there, or you know, in the magazines, and like, but I can't because I've been given this. So to suddenly realize actually you can be that, and it's not actually about whether you're a man or a woman, it's actually about expressing your true self. And gender affirming care is not just for trans people. I really think that trans people are the gift that the world needs right now, because we are in, despite all of the stuff that's happening and has happened in the past to my elders, you know, we are still here, and we stand tall, and we go out in our high heels and wave our sequins around and just enjoy, if that's for you, or we hide in a corner and play board games like me. But, you know, whatever that is for you, we are proud. And I think a lot of the cisgender, the normative society, just accept it. They go, I have to be this to fit in, I have to fit into the group. And that's that message of where Euphoria comes in, because once you're truly allowed to voice your feelings, have a community around you, build connections, and feel safe, that's amazing. And I talk to people, go, gender affirming care for me is actually all the things I should have done as a teenager. You know, go and try on clothes, go hang out with friends, talk about things, talk about having sex, right? I hated the idea of sex before, because before operation, I had a part that didn't identify with. You know, I had to live with that my whole life. And now I've had my post-op, and I'm loving finally looking in the mirror and going, there you are, Stacey May. You know, like I see you finally after 40 years. You know, and I really like to leave that message with, you know, especially for our allies as we move into that space, is that, you know, my freedom is your freedom, right? My safety is also your safety, right? Bodily autonomy, access to care, all of those things needed for everybody, no matter what their gender are. And that's what gender affirming care is. Thanks.
I think what really resonated with me, with what you both said, is visibility, and you know, that being grounded in our humanity and being led by us. And Stacey, that we obviously, you know, all need community. And I think that when I think fundamentally what is gender affirming care, it's everything. It starts with community, not to be isolated. It's, you know, that young trans masculine person getting that first binder. It's the first packer, the tucker, the bra, you know, HRT, the surgeries. It's having people to reflect on how absolutely life affirming and joyful those moments are. So I think that each of them are as equally as valid and as important as each other. You know, we can't isolate one form of care, because, you know, really our liberation and our justice, I think, is grounded in everyone having that care they deserve. And I think that, you know, what does care look like for trans people in prison or in custody? You know, what does care look like for people who have no, you know, access to finances or housing stability? It's really, it's life-saving, because so many members of our community really depend on it. And often I think, you know, a surgery or medical care is what's talked about, but really it's the authenticity of our lives, and it's all part of our lives that we deserve. And yeah, I think it's life-saving because of what both of you have said, you know, because we deserve to be visible, we deserve to have our humanity, and we all deserve a strong community to reflect with and reflect on.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I think, you know, if anybody's in any doubt, that really helps frame the conversation we're having here. I've got a few quick questions for you, just ask for one person to answer each of these. So, gender euphoria can change. one day an outfit that makes me feel amazing doesn't hit the next. Can you talk about that at all, Stacey May?
Yeah, and I think it comes, I think, for me from that binary concept of how we exist, right? It's a saying that we only exist in two places. You're either a man or you're a woman. And like, that's a journey. And even for cisgender folk, when you're going through your teenagehood, how many different outfits did you try? How many different styles did you try? Was there a punk stage in your life? Was there, the part of your time you smoked weed and sat in the fields, wear flowering dresses, right? These are all normal stages of life. And yes, it is harder for us because of the world that we are in and those restrictions that are placed on boxes, but there are not enough boxes for our community, right? Because it's just queer is massive. Queer is, it's not the hedgerows or the footpaths and the lines that we draw. It's the wind-blown seeds that fall in the cracks of the pavement and just grow anyway, right? The meadows with just random flowers growing. Those little flowers that just pop out, in the middle of nowhere in somebody's garden bed. They are what it's about. So yes, you go to times when you may want to express or style your way in a certain way. And there are other days where you're going to wake up and maybe you heard a good song on the radio, right? And you meet a new artist who looks really cool and you're going to adopt some of that style. And that's the importance of having such diversity in our community. I've seen a lot of people talk about you're not non-binary enough, or you're not trans enough, or you're not feminine enough. But actually it's about you and your identity at the moment and being comfortable with expressing who you are. And I wish there was a waiver on my form when I transitioned, because they did not put not being able to find a dress in the morning when you've got a wardrobe full of dresses as one of the negative effects of transitioning to be a woman. That's never talked about. I struggle with that so much. I'm like, I have to have red shoes to match my red dress, and I need to wear red lipstick today. And, all those things are actually complexities of normal life, of being feminine, that we kind of hold that as like, how do I deal with that? It's like, go find a new dress, honey. Go up shopping. Give me a ring. I'll come up shopping with you. If you're in WA, that is. But it's building that community around you to find people that you like and not letting it get to you internally.
Thanks, Stacey May. Now I've got, what is the difference of this experience across age groups? And actually, sorry, gender euphoria saves older lives too. It's not just young people who die by suicide. How is this experience different across age groups, and how can we support people at different ages? Avic.
Yeah, look, it's a big question, isn't it? I think the thing to think about is as Stacey May just sort of spoke to as well, our understandings of gender and our understandings of ourselves often change over time. And that's something that we need to recognize as well. And whether we're cis or trans, our ideas of what our masculinity or our femininity or our fluidity might look like is going to shift and change based on that. And there are different cultural norms associated with different age ranges as well around our gender expression. I think a really important thing to think about, we talk a lot about young people and the need for support and social connection and things like that, and that's fundamental and so important, but we often forget about older people. And we forget that people might be coming out for the first time, in their late 70s. I remember there was a beautiful movie, and if people haven't seen it yet, I strongly encourage it. It's called Becoming Colleen or Becoming Colette. I should get the name of that right before I recommend it. But it's this beautiful story of an older lady who affirms her gender while she's in a nursing home. It's quite a lovely story, but she speaks to some of those complexities and challenges of being an older trans person who affirms their gender later in life. If we think about some of those barriers and stressors that already impact on older people that we know about in our society, isolation, depression, anxiety, family politics, access to care, all of these things. And then we add those additional barriers that as trans and gender diverse people we might have. Ability to access community might become harder as we age. Family relationships and dynamics, coming out as an older person and, potentially losing access to grandchildren. These are all things that we might forget about, the complexities of gender affirmation for an older member of community. Visibility, I remember the very first time the only representation of a trans person that I had when I was growing up was a really, really terrible representation of a butch person in what was it? The Killing of Sister George was the name of the movie. And then the Armistead Maupin series, Tales of the City, which had a much more positive representation. But so, we now have a world where people are a lot more visible. And that's really helpful and sustaining. But for older members of the community, that's actually quite a huge culture shift as well. So supporting that. So making sure that people have access to our communities, that our communities are not just focusing on our young people, that we are actually looking at, well, how do we support our older folk? How do we make sure that our older folk can share their stories with our younger folk? Because that's really important as well. How do we make sure that, those support services, our NDIS providers, our out-of-home care providers, our home visits nurses, all of these people who might be, more and more necessary as we age, are actually going to also continue that affirmation and visibility journey. So it's a complex space. It's not impossible, but I think, as a society, we need to do better supporting all of our older folk. And then we need to really look at what that challenge might look like for our trans and gender diverse elders.
Vic. Now we have, how can we better support and create safer spaces for gender diverse and trans young people, particularly in this political climate? And that's for Nico.
Yeah, I think as Vic has just really sort of powerfully highlighted, is that no matter someone's age or experience, that we have a responsibility to support all members of the community, and that involves trans young people just as it involves trans older people. And I think, especially here in Queensland at the moment, trans and gender diverse young people are under attack, and what they need is our support and, is our voices, our advocacy. They need every letter possible written to, our local politicians who are informing these decisions. And, I think we've seen the power of our community, whether it's over 5,000 people protesting in the city, protesting, our local members' office. We've stood really firm and really strong in our stance, not just for trans young people, but for the future of our community. And I think that that is a responsibility that we all hold, and should hold really deeply, because when we think about the future, we're also thinking, of course, about, well, what are the trans lives of people, in custody at the moment? Or what is it like for trans immigrants, trans Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? How are trans people in Palestine at the moment? They're not doing well. We have a responsibility, I think, to the future of our community. And that's something that we all have, of all ages. And yeah, I think obviously today is about euphoria, and it is euphoric how strong our community has stood up for each other in Queensland, and how just absolutely relentless we are in our stance for young people. And that's, to me, that's not only euphoria, but that's absolute pride.
Awesome, thanks. One question here is about the role of allies in supporting TGD people as colleagues and service users. And I want all of you to take a moment to think about, what advice do you want to share for allies today? Stacey May, do you want to go first?
Yes, happy to do that. I think with any minority population and a group of individuals that are such a small number, we're never big enough or have enough voice on our own to really elevate our needs So quite often what can happen, especially as money is filtered into larger non-dedicated services, that gets filtered out. So even like when we do the LGBTIQA+, it's amazing to have the group together. But imagine trying to advocate as somebody who's intersex on your own without being brought into a group of people to advocate together. And that's the key thing. Like, Aboriginal communities, only 3% of the population. Trans, I think, is sitting somewhere between the 1% and 2%. There are not enough people in that community to have enough votes at the table for themselves. So it's always important when we look back at ourselves. I always do this little thing when I talk about allyship, and I break it down to, like, when you go into a room, so you go to a conference or you go to a meeting and you stand in a room, your first thoughts, and maybe do this next time, it's a bit of a call to action, do this next time you go to a meeting or a big conference. Notice what you're doing. Notice that you're looking for people like you. You're looking for people that are the same, or your friends, or somebody you already have a connection with. All right. But then when you do that next time, take a step back and notice that feelings. What feelings are you get? And then notice the people that give you a negative feeling. All right. So whether they're from a different culture background from you, from a different identity, maybe they bring up something for you from an internalized fear. And just hold that for a second and think about whether or not they're on their own or they have other people. Because for us, I might be the only transgender person in the room, or that I notice. All right. There might be only one Aboriginal person in the room. So I always say, like, just take it, hold it. And if you're brave enough, be that person that builds a connection today. All right. Go and stand with the person you least want to stand with. All right. Because that might be their only connection today. And then, so when we talk about Euphoria Saves Lives, that might be the best moment of their week, that somebody came up to them and was genuinely interested in them, right, and can open the door. And that's where that gender euphoria and like the suicide prevention work that we do is about building those connections. So I think as allies, sometimes you have to recognize like your privilege and your safety and give that to other people. So if you're brave enough, next time you do this, just take that moment and go talk to somebody you've never met before, perhaps one that gives you fear for whatever you've got been fed from the national media. All right, strip it away, hold it somewhere at the back, out of the way, and go and listen to their story. So I guarantee you it will not reflect what's in the back of your mind.
That advice, I think that's phenomenal. I also want to throw in that for allies, one of the things I'd love for us to do is flip the script. I can't recall, I can't count the number of times that I've been sitting there having a conversation with someone who's met me for the first time and overcome that fear and everything like that, and then talks to me about how hard it must be. Oh, you're so brave. It must be so hard being trans. You know what? Being trans is wonderful. I love my life. I have been able to experience so much joy because of who I am and being able to live it authentically. And yeah, there's been a few hurdles along the way. But that's the boring conversation. I don't want to have that. And the last thing that I want to hear is going into a meeting and having that as the script, because when that's the script, that's where the 15-year-old who expects that their life isn't going to amount to much is getting that message from. So we need to have our allies actually go, you know what? Trans folk are amazing. Trans folk are so strong. Trans folk are so talented. And here are all the things that we can do to support their joy and their euphoria and their success and their thriving. And that's what I want our allies to start doing.
I would love to quickly answer this in 3 parts. The first one is when we did hear the awful news about the government's decision recently, an absolute leader didn't say anything, just said to in the community, said to me, "Let's go coffee." And her first words were, "I'm not your ally, I'm your accomplice, and we're in this together." And I think that in the last couple of months, that has just absolutely rung in my head, and just her strength and her power, has really shown me what, I guess, not allyship, but champion/accomplice is meant to be. The other thing is, in training, I've always said the best way that you can support our community is to come to us with a complex and in-depth understanding of your gender. Because, then you come to the table, then you've got some skin in the game, right? You put in the work, you understand what your gender is, To me, that's what absolute trans power and brilliance is. It's having that in-depth and complex understanding about who we are and being really proud about that. So I always ask, like, let's move from just saying our pronouns to saying why we use them, because things are understood through context. So let's stop, fetishizing and tokenizing genders. We've all got genders. They're all absolutely amazing. Let's share them. Let's use them and let's be proud of them. And the third one is that, and I think that Vic and Stacey have really said this powerfully, is that we need active allyship when it counts. And, I think about one young woman who came to our service and said at lunchtime, I can't sit down and I don't have any friends to go to, so I just walk. Because if I'm walking, that's when I feel most safe. And, every time I hear that we've got these amazing, LGBTI programs in schools, but then, the teacher overhears a student say that, calls someone, a homophobic slur or a trans slur and doesn't pull them up. Well, then where's allyship in those moments? Because we know that all members of our community need it when it counts. So I think that's moving from passive allyship to really being a champion and accomplice for our community is really showing up for us when it counts.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And I have the next question for you as well. It's around really staying safe and strategies for staying strong and safe. And the question is, how do we build support for gender euphoria when triggers of gender dysphoria and discrimination remain? That's for you as well, Nico.
Yeah, I think gender euphoria in the face of discrimination isn't about always knowing why we're doing something. Intention is so strong and it always shines through. And I think knowing who we are, who we stand for, what our reference points are, because times do get tough, like has been said, being trans is the great part. It's the transphobia, the discrimination, the harassment, the isolation that we're still subject to. That's the hard part. But when in those moments, we draw on, well, why do we want to exist in a community? Why have we decided to, walk this authentic and beautiful journey? Because we deserve to. And, we're so proud to, or I certainly am. So I think euphoria in those moments is knowing who we are and knowing our community and knowing what we stand for, drawing on our values and being strong in them.
And Vic, do you want to add anything to that for the question, where and how can people detect subtle stigma within themselves and transform it into euphoria?
Yeah, I think from from that is a curiosity, often and I grew up in a world where there was no visibility, where there was quite a lot of negative, if we can imagine a world where there's more negativity than there is now, and so I think there were a lot of internalized messages, for myself that just became my day-to-day around how I understand myself, how I understand masculinity, how I understand my place in a community. And what I've found is that the more curious I can be, a thought pops in, a response to something, and instead of just going with that response, going, oh, that's interesting. Why am I having that response? What's driving that? And I think all of us, as has been said so eloquently before, whether we're trans or cis, we all have an experience of gender, and we all have an experience of gender euphoria, and we all have negative influences on those experiences. Patriarchy is an amazingly pervasive thing that says to young boys, you cannot be a boy if you don't do X, Y, and Z things, and so we're all absorbing, no matter where we sit on the spectrum, we're all absorbing these messages and these biases. And if we can all take that breath, my wife is constantly saying to me, just breathe before you react. If we can all take that breath and go, okay, what is driving this reaction, and really be curious about that and interrogate it, then we can go, oh, actually, here is an opportunity for a bit of revolution or a bit of rebellion against that. Here's where I can push back and disrupt that narrative. And there can be such joy in that disruption.
And I'd like to jump on the back if I can, Vic, with that, because I like to talk about with my peers a lot about listening to your body and emotions, right? Because you know, whether it's an outfit, where you feel today, an emotion that you're feeling, sometimes it's just listening to what that feeling is and why it's there. And while it might not be dysphoria, if you're not quite feeling $1 million today, just take that moment to go, what have I not done today to make me feel like $1 million? For me, it's listening to comedy or having a coffee. You know, in my early days of transition, I used to put posters on the mirror, which would have my favorite moments or photos of when I've really felt euphoric, and bring myself to visualize that moment again. So I might not be feeling fantastic today, but I remember the times that I did. So I think when we're all on a journey, those small incremental changes we go through are small. So we don't notice them from day to day. But when we look back and reflect on 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, and look at where we're at today, we can then bring that sense of euphoria back in to where you're at, rather than go, oh, I still have this black shadow. And then I go, oh, I used to look like a gorilla. You know what I mean? And just go, I've actually come a long way. So it's just maybe a little bit, but you know, we're working on it and just reflecting of where you're at.
And did you want to add anything to that? The next question for you there, Stacey May, was where to find positive focused news, studies and resources for a gender diverse community.
Yeah, this is a really common issue I find, especially in some of the suicide prevention spaces. You know, a young person might go into Google and go gender affirming care, and what they get, well, for the experiences I've had have always been, you know, you get hate from mainstream media and all the clickbait that's going around. And then you also get pornography, or for me anyway, I get a lot of cross-dressing community. And I have no issue with the cross-dressing community, but it took me so long to find a space that was beyond that and into the trans community, because I didn't know the word transgender at the time. So I kept falling into the same holes because I was using that mainstream services. So I always say to folk, I know it's hard now because the horse is already bolted, but just think about building structures and supports around you now, rather than waiting for the crisis moment. You know, do your friends and family and people around you know who are the local services? Now, we've got a newspaper in WA, which is out in Perth, which does queer positive media, right? Rather than going into one of the mainstream media organizations. You know, we have Transphobia WA here, we have Living Proud, LGBT Rights and Aging, we have WAC, we have SHQ, we have lots of services that are all really supportive and have great information for those different components of your journey. And I'd reach in to other organizations. And yeah, there's so many. I can get some links dropped in if you like, because it's like going, where can I find good news? They're everywhere, just not on your mainstream media. So I moved away from TV and mainstream media 3 years ago. Literally 2 weeks ago, a week ago, I got brave enough to delete my Facebook, right? Because of what's happening. But I finally, because everything's on Facebook for me, my family, my friends, my community, events. So it's finding that confidence to go, actually, is this benefiting me? Really? As my own well-being, right? And putting that aside and looking at sourcing those local, awesome organizations that are doing great, awesome things. Like we've got some stuff in Perth that they run queer events. So we've got Team Perth, we've got Pride WA, you know, we've got all these little, I think there's a Pride Professionals here in WA as well. They're all organizations go and get all the information you need. I use Reddit more than I use any of the mainstream providers. So yeah, but we'll get some links dropped in anyway, so you got some specific stuff. And I think Jeannie's just popped in there for me, Transforming Families, an amazing one for families. It's led by a research team. And obviously LGBT Health Australia has great information. You can connect to us at Queer and Diverse Pathways or Neko and Vic's teams. So
Thank you, Stacey May. Unless you have to go too, Vic, I was going to say for everybody online, I know that some of you will have to log off, so welcome you to come back and thanks for staying until now, and welcome you to come back and watch the final thoughts in the recording. One of the things that we talked about in preparation for today was anger, because I was really keen on exploring messages of hope, and one of our panelists pointed out that anger is a really important and valid response to some of what's happening in the world at the moment. And I would like each of our panelists to kind of share some final thoughts, and also some comments about anger and how we can harness it. So I'll go to you first, Vic.
Sure. I think, anger is often given a bit of a bad rap. We often, and look, I'm Gen X, right? So I was brought up to believe that, if you got angry, you should go and have a shower until the anger went away. So it's taken me a long time in my life to actually go, actually, anger is not necessarily a bad thing. And it's not so much the feeling of anger, it's what we do with it. And anger can be so productive. And when we look around at some of the stuff that's happening in this world, if we're not angry, there's something wrong. We need to be angry. We need to harness that anger and say, in the light of all this negative news, I'm angry about that. And the algorithm is designed to make us angry, right? So let's use that and say, well, hang on, why should the only visibility that I get in my life about me be hate-filled, be a deficit model? No, I'm going to change that story. And I'm going to make sure that my posts are affirming. I'm going to make sure that I'm promoting visibility, the good news stories. We all got hung up in the world politics space, and we focused in on, all the problems that the recent elections in other parts of the world had for our communities. And we missed the fact that America got its first trans woman as a congressman. I'm angry about the fact that we missed that. So I'm going to promote that as much as I can. And I think when we start to use anger as a productive tool in our resistance, then we're really going to get somewhere.
Yeah, I can jump in on the back of that if I can, because anger isn't a weakness, right? And I totally agree with that's something to harness. I think there's a phrase that there's like frustration can be fuel, and I guess that's kind of what I do when I do my reflection of when I read something or get interacted in the wrong way. I do that leaning into discomfort. We talk about it in the lived experience, the sports space, about holding things lightly. So rather than holding them really deep inside us where it causes a lot of emotional distress, it's holding them like I do visualization in my sessions with holding my hands out and holding the thing and looking at it, all right? Because anger can be destructive, and that can be isolating because we fear what can happen from the anger. But if we look in and we hold it more lightly and look about what can I do with this now? How can I build a sacred container for my anger, right? So I'm not causing harm with it, but I'm doing something with purpose, whether it's to disrupt oppression or, to make an article, write a letter, go down and meet a local community group and have a conversation, do some journaling, start a movement, do some creative expression. So I do hyperrealism now, which I never thought I would do. And I use that to get rid of a lot of my sadness and a lot of my anger without taking that on the world, but use that to reflect and then go, right, what am I going to do with that feeling while I have it? Right? Because it's a powerful emotion, one of the strongest emotions. So use it for making change.
Yeah, two very powerful responses that I'm going to try to add to in some way, but I think that we're critical fundamentally about what we care about, and we're angry about what we care about. And I think what you both said is that we're really worthy of being angry about. And, our trans love and our trans joy and, the trans justice, when we get it, but then also when we don't get it, is worth being angry about. And I think that, we look at the Tenderloin region, we look at Stonewall. They didn't start because someone said, "Oh, I'm so happy about being, having my rights stripped away and being arrested again and not being able to wear gender affirming items in the street and being harassed by police. No, they started because of anger and resistance and coming together and collectivity. And I think that we can look to the future, but we can also learn so much of the power of anger and resistance from our absolute trans leaders that we stand on. So yeah, it's an absolute honor to be part of this community. With all our anger, joy, love, hope, and rage, I think that they all feed into each other, make them all a whole lot stronger.
Oh, thank you so much, Nico, Vic, and Stacey May. I would love to keep hearing what you have to share about a lot of topics, but we'll have to finish off. And it's been such a privilege to be in the room for this conversation. Really, thank you all so much for your time and insights that you've shared with everybody. Thanks everybody else also for still being here. I have chucked a link in the chat to our evaluation if you take a moment to fill it out. We'll send out the recording links, etc. And don't forget, if this has raised anything for you, that you should reach out to support. Services like QLife are there to reach out to. And that's it from me. So I wish you all a joyful or angry rest of the day.